Hi, my name is Bruce Becker, and you're watching The Drum Brother. Yeah, mainly these last few months I've been a little bit more active teaching. That's been one of my great passions is to teach. I've sort of carrying on a flag that was passed to me from Freddie Gruber. I had a lot of chance to spend time with him as a student for about 7 years or so, back in the late 70s into the early 80s. And then later on, in the mid to late 80s, I started to just hang with him and watch him teach. And by the 90s, 92, I moved to Europe, and I lived in Belgium for 4 years and Vienna, Austria for a year. And that's probably when I spent more time with Freddie in a concentrated sense, because he came to spend time with me and live with me. And we did a lot of clinics together. In fact, you saw one. I showed you one that I have, a very, very rare one. Freddie was in great form that day. But anyway, I've been teaching mostly a lot these days. I still do some good sessions in LA. My gigging schedule has slowed down a little bit, some by choice, some by just the changing landscape of the music business. But I've been working on an instructional DVD that talks topically about those kinds of things, about setting up the hands and positioning and the relationship of how we interact with the stick. And at the same time, I've been working on that book. And the book is different than the DVD. It's more about odd time concepts and philosophies and how somebody can develop certain things, because that's a very challenging subject for a lot of drummers. So I hope I've written it in a way that will give people some particular phrasings and ideas to think about to help develop their playing in that genre. Well, the DVD, that really speaks about the different positionings of drum technique that we use and trying to illustrate the connection between them all. So if I talk about French grip approach, there are certain specific things that are inherent that we want to tap into, and that's balance and the positioning of the stick. What I always present is that we're trying to change our reflexes to respond to how we want them to respond, and also how they respond to the stick physically in the sense of balance and the creating of momentum or movement. And so, there are certain things that are very valuable to understand in that setup. The position of the stick in the hand in French grip and the arm position, how that forearm is subservient to the bounce of the stick, And I'll just illustrate a little move that will show the connection from French grip to German grip, and German grip back to French grip. And trying to use all the subtle nuances to make that connection to be really well understood and accessed You know, if you can't access it, then how are you going to use it? And then, of course, I always say that in pursuing your technical studies, you're always driven by your musical influences and your musical experiences. You know, if you're only playing rock and roll and you say, well, I want to develop my jazz playing, if you're only working that from the standpoint of maybe working on some independence exercises on your drum set in a practice mode, and you're not playing jazz, you're never really going to be able to speak that dialect in a responsible or a correct way. Responsible, you know, meaning to take on the traditions of what has been already given to us from our great masters, you know. So, and, you know, in German grip, there are certain things, again, that are inherent to the positioning and how our anatomy works, and that means now that we can use the wrist. So we have certain things in German that can be well illustrated to support certain kinds of movement and how we would use that in a drum set setting or a snare drum set setting. And, you know, really just working the two approaches. And then, of course, the third approach, traditional grip, which a lot of guys like, mostly jazz players, but there's a lot of guys who make a nice presentation of how to play a backbeat with that left hand in traditional grip. One guy that comes to mind is Steve Ferroni, now playing with Tom Petty. He gets a nice backbeat, a nice pocket. You know, Jojo Mayer is a firm traditional grip player, Dave Weckl. But then there's guys, you know, who play match grip, who play great too. Bill Stewart is a jazz player. He plays match grip. Now, I have seen him play a couple times where he sneaks into traditional grip, but it's usually for about 8 or 12 bars, and then he zips back into his normal match grip approach. So those kinds of things are going to be my depth of approach in the DVD, to really talk about how to set those things up and to manifest good changes in your playing. Well, I've been carrying on a group with my brother David for now going on 30 years. And the crux of the group is contemporary jazz. So it's compositional stuff, but with an emphasis on some improvisation. And that's always driven me to explore more varieties of how to improvise, and also to be, you know, free and flowing as we all want to be in our drumming. But at the same time, you know, I've always been a rocker as a kid. You know, my first exposure to rock music as a kid at six years old, because my dad didn't let us listen to any rock until I was about 6. He was like this staunch, we must listen to classical music only. You know? So when I finally discovered the Beatles, and also the Monkees, which Mark Shulman would attest to, those were big groups for both of us, and Mark's a really good friend. I know him all the way back then, before I even played drums, and before, I think, or around the time he started to play. But those things had a big impact as well, because I really wanted to fine-tune certain things about playing. You know, when you listen to a drummer like Ringo, he has a certain personality. While we may say, well, he wasn't so technically great, he had certain things in his technical approach that were driven by the music he was playing. So I found that fascinating, and I wanted to access some of those things, or I wanted to access things by John Bonham or other players as well. So I've always run these two paths of rock and jazz, and as I've moved along now, and I'm an older guy, I look back and I say, you know, for a guy who just plays jazz, I think it's always important to investigate some of the higher points of rock and pop drumming. There's a certain organizational thing, a certain pocket and feel that we access through that music. And for a guy who only plays rock and pop, I think it's very important to understand and to study up the swing values and the traditions of the instrument, because the instrument comes from that swing period, you know, the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and then started to branch off into other areas. But that certain sense of swing that drummers like Buddy Rich and Papa Joe Jones and Big Sid Catlett and names maybe some people know or they don't know, but those guys they're the forefathers. They're the branches or the roots of the tree. Very, you know, valuable to understand how that works. So when you listen to a guy like John Bonham, for example, or Mitch Mitchell, rock drummers, they swung. They had a swing feel in their playing. And I think that, for me at least, when I look back, that's some of the great personality that you know, really speaks volumes in their playing, and things that I thought were very valuable to develop. So to answer your question, what drove me, it's like those things. And then, locking in with different people, playing with different people inspire you. I played with Barbara Dennerlein, who's a Hammond organ player from Germany. And I played with her for about 2.5 years, doing a lot of clubs and festivals. And my brother and I have managed to play a lot of clubs and festivals throughout the years and do several recordings. And I've been blessed to play with certain people through the years, whatever. I mean, when you get into name dropping, it's not necessarily always the biggest thing, but, I'm not going to sit here and, do that. But I played with some great people, and I've been very fortunate, and I've taken all those experiences and tried to, every playing experience pushes me a little bit more forward, or recording experience, When I came to Freddie, I was trying to figure it out, of course. I had a penchant for drumming. I always say drums came to me because I didn't choose the drums. We were sitting around one summer with my friends in the neighborhood, and everybody said, let's start a rock band. It was a hot summer day in LA, and the kids in the neighborhood, 5 of us, and everybody barked out an instrument before I had a chance. And finally, when it came to me, the only thing that was left was drums. And I said, well, I guess I'll play drums. And I'm serious, without missing a beat, the one kid who was with us, he picked up the Yellow Pages phone book and, called up some guy arbitrarily and said, yeah, my friend wants to take drum lessons, and handed me the phone. So that's how I started. Okay. So when I finally got to Freddie, it was about 5 years later. I was about 19. And I knew I wanted to do this, and I had some friends that were really talented guys. Mark Schulman's one of them. I know Mark for a long time. So Mark was always a really great, polished player in his presentation of stuff, and funky. So, I wanted to be a funk guy. Then I had another drum friend who was a really good jazz and big band player, and I wanted to do that. So I stumbled across Freddie Gruber as a teacher, and his approach was more about, facilitating technical approach and concepts. He didn't teach you beats, He didn't say we're going to learn jazz pattern number 1 or rock pattern number 2. He had a conceptual approach, and I found it fascinating right from the get-go. What I didn't understand is I stayed with him for a long period of time, so when we moved beyond some of the hand things, which we always were in touch with, we went into conceptual things. That I don't know how many students of Freddie really went that direction, because I'm sure a lot of guys maybe studied for a year and a year and a half, got some hand stuff together, and went on their way. Me, I was like, well, where else can we take this? So we did all this crazy stuff. And by the time 1984 rolled around, I had been playing, I went on the road, I did certain things, but I'd always come back. So that's 7 years later after studying with Freddie. And then around 1987, I kept in touch with him that other 2 years or 3 years, but 1987 when Buddy Rich passed, I felt this responsibility because Freddie was really depressed about that. Yeah. They were close. So I started hanging around his house, and I would, if he went out of town, I'd house sit for him. And when he was teaching, I would just show up and hang out for several hours and watch him teach. And I'd go get the spaghetti from Vinny's Italian restaurant, or the... Cagliura? No, there's an Italian restaurant called Vinny's. Yeah, Vinny Cagliura. I went to Vinny's and got some pizza, man. Yeah. In the 90s, I moved to Europe, and I remember having a conversation with Freddie, and I think he was sad that I was leaving, He was like, oh, man, you're going to move to Europe, And then he said, I'm going to come over, and we're going to hang. So he came over about 4 or 5 times. And those particular hangs for me were more in depth because it was all about drum stuff. We went to the Frankfurt Music Messe. We'd go to the Koblenz Drum Festival, which was a huge drum festival through drums only. And man, some of the guys on the bill were Steve Gadd, Simon Phillips, Greg Bissonette, Virgil Donati, Dennis Chambers, Trelock Gertu. Tell me when you're bored and you want me to stop. I mean, it was ridiculous. Yeah. And that was 3 festivals or so. And, Freddie knew everybody, and he'd be doing his Freddie Gruber stuff, and we'd stand off to the side of the stage because we would go backstage, and we'd watch guys, and he'd hit me in the side and watch that guy, and he'd make some comments, and then we'd go back to the hotel where we were rooming, and I would ask a question or two, and then it would go into a whole presentation of stuff. And then I would draw back to things we did back in the late 70s or things that he was doing currently, because he didn't stay with one approach as a teacher. He moved beyond that and went to different places. So by the time the 90s rolled around, it was a big difference from what he was doing in the late 70s, you know. So anyway, that really drove me to first, you know, find a better way to do things technically, but it opened up doors for me musically. It helped me fine-tune and, you know, add some more substance to what I was looking for in my playing. So that was a really, I must say, a really big influence, and I still look back to him very vividly and recall lots of great things. Now, again, you saw that video. I have a clinic that we did in 1993 or 4 at the Future Music School in Germany, which he was very clear. Normally he was talking in tongues, you know, and most people would go like, well, I don't know what this guy's talking about. He must know something, but I don't understand anything. Yeah. He was pretty clear, and I know that I probably kicked him in the butt about that, because he was talking to guys from Germany, you know, because it was in Germany. And, you know, they don't speak English, so they don't understand the irony or the, you know, the sarcasm that Freddie may have, or the, you know, sense of humor he was trying to put across. You know, it doesn't sometimes translate. So I told him, I said, Freddie, you can't do that, man. It's not going to work. So he really was clear on this. I mean, I just watched it with you and Tony Arco, and man, it was great. So those things really propelled me to fine-tune the playing, but more importantly, travel the avenue of education to teach, because I really feel a strong torch to pass on to younger players. Because now, you know, some of the great players have passed on that started on this instrument, you know, or started the whole thing. And some of the great teachers like Jimmy Chapin, no longer around. Joe Morello, no longer around. Freddie Gruber. Yeah, well, the book is going to be a little bit different. The book is more about odd time things that Freddie and I discussed a little bit, but my embellishments on things. The hand things are, and you know, it's not like I'm doing what he did. I'm taking the conceptual things, and from all the, it's been now about 30 years since I've been teaching, so all the experiences I've had as a player and as a teacher, and knowing how to tap into what guys need, you know, what kind of physical change does somebody need, you know? You know, so the DVD I'm looking to have out this year, 2012, and the book, separate topics, odd time stuff, same time. I'd like to do both. The book was an inspired idea, and at some point my idea was, I'm just going to write it just to, you know, because for me. And then I thought, well, I showed it to a few people, some of my students and a couple of guys that I have great respect for, to have them look at the literature. And everybody said, wow, man, that's great. So, you know, I'm going to put it out, and hopefully people will be able to tap into what it is I'm speaking about and, you know, better their playing by that. I'll probably put an audio CD so that you can hear some examples. You know, because sometimes when you look at a book, it's challenging to get yourself into the book. At least you use your ear sometimes, and learning processes like that. Some people are visual, and some people are audio, you know, with the ear. Yeah. And so you got to kind of tap into both areas so everybody can benefit. Okay. Why don't you play for me some 9-stroke rolls back to back? So we'll play, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So let's break that down a little bit. In terms of, you know, you can do things many different ways, but it's always very good to outline a movement. You're trying to create a dance with your sticks. So as you do that dance with your sticks, what you want to do is create a choreography. So if we make that choreography without the double stroke, and I just play down, tap, up, tap, down. Down, tap, up, tap, down. And a nice breath in between. We'll focus on just the right to right for right now. We won't worry about the left. So just play that down, tap, up, tap, down. 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 And now make it a 9-stroke roll and doubles. And doubles. Okay. So on your upstroke, let's not exaggerate the movement outward too much. What I generally call this up to down stroke is you could break it down and it would be a very small version, or not the small version, but the starting version of what we would call a Moeller strike. So when I break down a Moeller technique, I would say from the roll of my shoulder, right, into my elbow, releasing my wrist as I come up, and then strike. That's the motion or the movement that I'm going to start to create a perpetual motion. So, but I can do that in rudimental playing as well. So again, if I do this movement, if you watch my up to down stroke, it can help add some choreography and some dance to that outline. And then when I make doubles, now the trick is not to come out too far and to expand the double inside the hand as you come up. Make
Actually, I see that your wrist is always on the same spot.
Yeah.
It's just the arm that moves a little bit.
Right, and I'm really just trying to find the elasticity of the stick, you know, so that I get a stretchy double. I kind of imagine that my stick has, you know, has a bunch of gum on it, and when I stretch it up, you see the gum stretching. So you feel the elasticity or the web that is connecting your movement to what it is you're playing. So when you come back now, just feel that and that upstroke inside that, and don't come too far out. Right. But give yourself a breath on the end when you finish playing the last of the 9-stroke. 1, 2, and 1, 2, and think of the time in the space. And so you didn't, you didn't move there. And 1.
Hard.
Yeah. Now there's a bunch of different ways. You know, you can add some systems of using your body weight to fall into your bottom end, your time, by lifting your heels and letting your weight fall. That's an old Freddie Gruber thing that I used to do with him. I had a great amount of time spent with Freddie, a lot of time. But he would do some things where he'd say, let your feet fall so you feel everything falling together. So in other words, left hand, right hand, left. Just to open up the roll so that you feel you have some elasticity with your doubles. I think
space.
I think the last thing you want to have is like doubles that sound like little short bullets, like, you know, really tight. And
I don't want to shoot anybody.
No, man. This is Italy. We don't do that here. Well, maybe we do.
That's what they say.
That's right. So let's try it with your left hand and see how the left hand goes now. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and down, tap, up, tap, down. Down, tap, up, tap, down. And down, tap, up, tap, down. 3. And down, tap, up, tap, down. And down, tap, up, tap, down. And down, tap, up, tap, down. And feel the breath of the and. Cool. And the other thing that
it's hard to coordinate this thing for me.
Well, absolutely. But everything, and you know, I bring up, and we were talking about this earlier, but I always bring up Steve Gadd as a great example of a guy who is, you know, as an early kid was a tap dancer. So I think he understands all the value of up to down strokes, and you see it in his playing. I mean, it's very visually present when you watch him play, and you can see the understanding of all that. And when you do that, you're really starting to coordinate and never losing out on any space of what you do. And now starting to enact upon all the value of space that you play. But what I was going to add to that is, when you come down now, what we want to do is solidify a certain amount of strike and impact. And that requires that when we lock it in, we kind of squeeze the stick and allow the stick tip to pop off the pad and pull into the hand. And now that's a tricky acquisition. We don't just get it by doing 1 or 2 exercises. There's a series of things that you can do to really heighten your awareness of that and bring it into a place where it's usable and it becomes a natural reflex. You know, when I'm talking about teaching in relationship to my students, when I have, you know, many students for, you know, they come week after week, is we are repositioning our understanding of our reflexes. We have reflexes and we may do something funny on the drum set, and what we have to do is we have to become more aware of what are we doing, how are we doing what we're doing, and retool up the reflex so it's more responsive to what we want and not to just what it does on its own. So in terms of that strike, there's a few things inside the hand back here that are quite helpful to allow the stick tip to pop into the hand, and then of course to position it in such a way where I have this little acoustic shell here to get more resonance out of the stick. So how does that come into place? Well, that's actually pretty good. Do that again, and feel the release of your wrist as you come up and strike. Yeah.
Is this all right?
Yeah, it's actually, if you look at your hand, I would say that if you turn your hand upside down and you're holding your stick, if you're holding it, if everybody knows how to hold a clave, okay, the instrument's the wood clave, this is how you hold a clave, and you need to allow it to have the resonance. If I hold it tight and I'm gripping it, listen to the tonal quality. Yeah. Everything's choked. Everything's resonant, yeah. So we want to create that inside the hand as well. That can shift and really help develop your tonal quality on the drum set. So what you have going on there is pretty cool. Yep. You don't have to hold it directly center in your palm. I would have it maybe just slightly off center, so that if I go into Moeller and I want to play some triplets, that the butt end of my stick is slightly off center, so I have a place to let it move up. If it's underneath my wrist and my forearm, it's going to bump into it. And I want to create
just one squeeze.
So you see, watch.
How can you put the thumb like this if you put it here, the stick?
Well, that's the tricky thing. That's a stretch that you work on. There's a certain couple of exercises
You
in
do
the
this?
yeah. But I don't want to just say, well, just put your thumb in, because that's easy to say. But how do you get it to just feel like it can be part of a natural reflex? There's certain exercises that you can set up to get it to adapt to the position of the stick in such a way that you can call that your home base. So once it's your home base and you understand all the rules that are set around that, you can modulate, you can move them around a little bit. It doesn't have to be so rigid. But in terms of getting that pop, that's part of it. The thumb position is actually, it's a similar thing in French grip. If I do French grip, there's a French grip strike. And if I look at my thumb, oh, there it is. If I do German, oh. And even if I do traditional grip and get just a strike from the traditional grip, my thumb is in as well. And so that can be a real good continuity. But there are certain exercises.
Is this cool like this?
Yeah. That would be a good
There's
strike.
space here.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it doesn't have to be like, you don't have to have any wood putty and fill in any spaces. But if you're starting with that, right, that was a good one. Did you?
But that's like this.
Again, I don't want to get too rigid with it. I don't want to say that it has to be just this.
Is it good like this?
There's a little breathing room. How does that feel?
It feels good, but it's not what it's supposed to be.
If you were my student every single week, I would work on certain things to have you be able to connect better with that. In other words, there's a mind-body connection that we do when we're learning to play the instrument. You know, a lot of us just pick up the sticks. We want to play rock beat number 1, and we want to get around the drum set and figure out what we're going to do from what we hear. And we don't really give a lot of thought to what we're doing with the sticks. So in order to better get our attention to what we're doing and how we're doing what we're doing, that takes a little bit of step-by-step process.
Yeah.
And a lot of people get a little nervous about it because it's, it's like, it's work. But that's what it is. Everything is discipline. When you sit down and want to be an expert in anything you do, you need to really take the time and the space to help develop that. If you don't, you're really going to miss out on the end result. And it's a journey. You don't just get somewhere and go, all right, I got everything together, I'm cool. No, it's a continuing journey. There's great drummers out there right now that we could speak about who are continually growing. I'll name 2 that I can think of that I've watched over many years grow as players. Peter Erskine and Steve Smith. And both of those guys, if you go back to how they played in the late 70s or early 80s and watch how they have developed to this point in time, they're much better players. They have much better touch and much better tone and ideas. And they didn't just sit around willing it and going like, gee, I wish I was a better player. They've worked, man. They worked their butts off. So my role as a drum teacher, what I do in Los Angeles is I'm really like a drum coach to a degree. And I was very fortunate to have a lot of time spent with Freddie Gruber that helps to know about certain things about the hands. We had some really detailed conversations in the 90s, but I was already studying with him in the 70s. So we had about a 30-year relationship.
Nice.
Pretty long, yeah. So you wanted to talk a little bit about Moeller and how that works and try to get a little more density out of the stick when you're playing Moeller 16th notes?
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
That's right.
All right. So here's a couple things to think about setup-wise. The setup for Moeller for me is really about the rotation of the shoulder into your elbow and allowing your wrist to release. And so if I do this initial strike, there I have what I call the Moeller strike. Okay. Now after that, I want to be able to not only just get my downstroke, but get some density out of my upstroke as I release and come back up, so that there's a little bit of a pop of the tip of the stick off the pad on the up. There's other mechanical things that I'm thinking about, but we don't want to get too detailed. But one thing is to watch my elbow. It really makes a nice circle every time. So, and when you come up, so go ahead, do that initial strike. So when you come up, let your wrist release. So feel the stick housed firmly inside the hand, but allow your wrist to release. Now, when I say release, let it feel like it's going to drop, but it can't open up because then the stick's going to fall out of your hand. But you want to have this feeling, in terms of your development of tension and release. We want to understand how that dynamic really works. And so when you come up, you feel as if this is releasing, and then you come to your strike, and your strike is firm. Now when you strike, don't let the stick pop away from your hand. Let it come into the hand so that you get this kind of a squeezing of the stick back into the hand so the tip pops off the surface, in this case the practice pad. So come on up again, release that wrist. Right. So now we're just going to play very simple eighth notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now you hear the softness of your upstroke and the stick's a little too loose in the hand.
Yeah.
Don't let it sit too loosely in the hand. I don't want it to be squeezed where you're creating so much tension in your hand, but you want it to be placed nicely inside the hand so that you can access the pop and the nice density out of the upstroke without sacrificing, the positioning. So 1 and 2 and 3. Let me step a little further. If I play triplets, we'll start with triplets first, and I have initial pop, pop, pop. So my first note is a pop. Yeah. Now it's not going to come much further off the pad at this tempo. Time and space are relative, so I don't want to be ridiculous about letting it pop so far off the pad that's going to throw me out of time. But I want to get a nice dense pop on the first one, let it drop, and let it kind of sit inside the hand, and then pick it up. So here are my triplets. Now, easier said than done. But take your attention to, watch the leverage of my butt into my stick, how it walks up evenly back here. And if you listen to my triplets, they're pretty dense all the way through. So the same thing would apply to 16th notes. In generating a Moeller move, you're still going to get a little bit more of an accented note, because that's just what happens. You're throwing it down a little bit, and then you're following the bouncing stick. Yeah. But to get a little more density, you want to bring this relationship of the openness of the bounce and your fingers to move with the stick so that you can add a little more anatomy. When you connect your anatomy to the stick, that helps you to define more tonal quality and more density. And I don't mean this, but I mean, this yin and yang, this balance of how much hand do I put in with that stick to get that nice fat tone, but without sacrificing and getting really tense and pushy with it. So check it out. Here's my 16th notes. Of course, when I get faster, it now is relegated to wrist and fingers. That move is delegated from what Freddie Gruber would call the system. This is an open-close. Some people call it push-pull, open-close, whatever you want to term it. Yeah. It's about allowing the stick to pivot through your fulcrum point and just adding enough snap. Thumb position is important because you want that to be a certain kind of a post to push against so that you're not using your whole hand. You want to use just really the back part of your hand. And I'll show you this. This was many, many years ago, Freddie Gruber said, let your hand hang, okay? And then he took a stick or put his hand and kind of pulled my wrist up. And you see these tendons, they naturally draw to a close.
Yeah.
So he would say to me, it's nothing more than opening and closing your hand. Of course, again, easier said than done because you have to have a certain amount of housing to the stick that's going to support all that kind of stuff. But it's really, again, it's just this inside the hand, and that works for double strokes, it works for rudimental playing like drags and roughs and four-stroke roughs and all those rudiments that are very valuable for us to study because they give us more touch, more dynamic, and much more control with our sticks. Do we use them all the time? Not necessarily. If you're playing a blast beat or you're playing any kind of drags and stuff like that, no, you're doing what you need to serve up your music.
Yeah.
So, but you want that Moeller thing. Those components are part and parcel to what that is, hand construction-wise. But so back to the 16th notes. Let's just see now if you can feel the stick lying firmly over the back three fingers as they're lying in a bed, firmly. And feel the bouncing stick. And see if you can put your attention onto the butt end of the stick so you can feel it walk up a little bit of some steps. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right? And then what you want to do is get inside that each bounce you kind of sit with. Now, you don't want to start too fast. You want to start it slow enough so that you can really document what am I doing and how does that feel. And as you open that up, as you get more comfortable, of course, speed is going to start to materialize. And everybody's got their
range.
ceiling, their range of how fast they can go and et cetera. But I think what a lot of players really get lost in is that they want to go for the speed immediately.
Mm.
It's more valuable to slow things down and open up the space. When you play faster, if you've practiced slowly for a long period of time to work on something, when you finally get to faster speeds, your visual perspective of space in that speed becomes deeper and broader. And then you really see the control value of what you have. So anyway, 16ths, and see if you can really feel the density of each stroke. And try not to just wrist it all the way through. Watch this. My wrist and my fulcrum and everything, they act like a shock absorber to the...
Yeah. I tend to exaggerate this.
Yeah, you're kind of sliding out. That's what a lot of guys do. They tend to slide out a little bit more. And what you want to try to do is make your move an elliptical upstroke. So as opposed to this. Now when you get faster, it's going to be smaller. But when you're in that mid-range tempo, I see it with my students a lot. When they initially start, not everyone, but some of the guys, they tend to sort of skid outward to try to get that. And they're not sitting in the extension of the stick doing this. You know what I mean? So this stretch, and watch.
So the elbows goes a bit like...
Yeah, I kind of support,
but
yeah, I don't really use, I mean...
stays on and the wrist goes more up and down. And
right, you're following this and the elbow supports the lift. The elbow is kind of driving a little bit of some of the movement at this tempo.
Okay. I need to practice it, but I'm understanding.
Yeah. And if you watch this, just check this out. As I do this, just as I kind of come up and follow the bouncing stick.
Yeah.
That's really what's going on. And then I'm trying to now let the stick do what it does and just finesse it enough to get what I need out of it.
Yeah.
So. Right, you feel the bounce now, and so of course balance is going to be a very important value when you have the stick set up in your hand, so you're using the balance to your advantage. Right, man. And then you can go into, one hand playing that Moeller move, and then the opposite hand filling in the space with what I deem or I call as a fulcrum wrist bounce. So just using that wrist and letting it bounce like a basketball. So I would be playing... Just look at consistency of the stick tips, they're both coming
Yeah.
to the same height.
Yeah.
It's hard, I can't play and talk at the same time. And left hand, you know? So the value of that, again, you know what you need it for because you're trying to serve up a certain thing that supports what you do musically and playing,
Yeah.
which is perfect. Everything we develop usually in technique is usually driven by what kind of interest musically we have or what kind of musical situations we're involved in. No problem with that. At the same time, as you're fine-tuning what you do musically, I think it's always very valuable to explore other things that you don't do musically because those things add depth to what you do.
Yeah.
And when you find yourself maybe moving beyond what you've done, you go like, all right, I did, enough of those kind of gigs, I want to get involved in this. You'll be prepared for that.
Yeah.
And then you'll find yourself perhaps fine-tuning another gauge of technical exploits, trying to fine-tune how you're going to get that dialect for that other musical style.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, James. Right on, man. So, Ali.
What's up, man?
Hey, man. This is what's going to be my book. It's sort of a practical concepts and philosophies in developing odd time playing.
Nice.
Yeah. So let's look at this one section. I have pretty much 3 sections right now, and I think I'm about 60% of the book done, Takes a while getting on that
Nice.
finale notation and getting the ability to work on it. But here's one idea. I'm going to play a jazz waltz, so that's jazz in 3/4 time. I'm going to make a very simple bass drum pattern to hold down my bottom, and my ride cymbal pattern is going to be a very, very ordinary jazz ride cymbal pattern. So it's going to be. And over that, I'm going to use 2 different comping exercises, 2 different rhythms. The first one is going to be the harder of the 2. The first one is going to be what I call an interquarter note triplet. So if I'm just going to tap tempo here, it would be 1 and 2, and 1, and 3, and 2, and 1, and 3. And in that setting, because it's a quarter note triplet spread apart, because we're in 3/4 time, the first bar is going to start on the middle beat of triplet 1. The second bar is going to come to the downbeat. So in this exercise, one valuable thing is to learn to track and really hear what you're playing. So your GPS system is really highly developed and you can follow your thoughts. You don't want to get into a situation where you're playing something and all of a sudden you're making a turn and you're like, oh no, how am I going to get out of this one? So here we go. I'm going to play the jazz ride cymbal pattern in 3. I'm going to play that bass drum pattern, the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So we'll stay with that one rhythm. Now I'm going to do a couple of moves to add a little more color and a little bit more, I don't want to say pressure, but a little bit more of an emphasis on my ear to track and follow what it is I'm doing. So I'm going to make a very easy thing since we have a 4-piece drum set here. We're going to just move that left hand clockwise. If I take that rhythmic phrase, as you see here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 notes. So I'm going to make 3 repetitions circularly over the 2-bar phrase. What's interesting is it's going to really have an interesting melodic content to it. So check it out. So dig that, man. Now, we could take all sorts of other moves and make the melody even more difficult to track. But the point is that when you start to do systems like that, when you're playing in an odd time, it really puts the emphasis on developing your ear to know where you are all the time. Because I think the most difficult thing for a lot of people to do is play odd time. They feel like this is some territory that's really nebulous, and how do I get into that, and how do I develop that? It's really to the point of when you think about any odd time, any time signature really, it's always about stress points. So we just have to learn to hear those stress points in another time signature so they become matter of fact, no big deal, you can play them. Of course, you must dabble with a band and play those kind of styles, otherwise you're not going to really develop it. You don't just develop something by not doing it. It's like speaking a language. You could sit and study, I could sit and study Italian for days and days and days, but if I don't come out here and speak to you guys and try to use my Italian, then I'm never really going to develop the ability to speak the language. Same thing with drums, same thing with anything in the musical language. Any dialect of music must be used, spoken, and developed, you know? So you want to try that one?
Okay.
Okay, man. So the feet are really going to help us to really stabilize the time, so we're really feeling that 3/4, so there's a, you know, a stability in the placement of our time. So just feel the feet of this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, went into 4. That's what normal people, or most people would do that. They would automatically kind of default to feeling it in 4 because it goes over the bar line in that funny way. So as you get comfortable and you understand the dynamic of the left hand versus the ride cymbal, really start to position yourself in such a way where you're focusing on the ride cymbal, then you're focusing on the left hand, you know where your feet are, and what I always say to everybody, man, you gotta count. You got to work on that verbalization of counting. And it's not easy. That's one of the great extracts from Gary Chester's books, was his ability to focus on all the limbs and to be able to count or sing what you're doing. So I don't necessarily go all that extreme, but I still think it's very valuable to develop that sense of counting so that you know where you are. So try it again. 1, 2, 3, 1. So,
try a little slower. Maybe.
Yeah. You had your hands going in the right direction, but your bass drum threw you a punch, man. One more time. 1, 2, 3. So that's part of the system. I have more cymbal patterns and I have more moves to adapt to. And I don't just have 3/4, I have a 5/4 section.
Wow.
And yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, I've showed this to a bunch of my students and some friends of mine who are high-level drummers. And everybody has expressed good words about that. So I'm hoping to have this done, you know, soon. It's, where are we today? It's around the end of May.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that by the end of June I should have everything finished. Like I said, I'm about 60% finished. A few more things to add. They're already written in my head. It's just getting that, you know, the time to sit down on the computer and do what you need to do. So.
Man, thanks. This one looks great. For real. The concept is really great.
Yeah, thank you, man. What I've done here is I've taken some patterns and developed what I'll just call as 2/4 time signature, but 8/16, because we're going to work more with 16th note kind of syncopated, funky patterns, but in odd time. So here's a pattern where we're playing a 2/4, or again I call it 8/16, and I'm just going to play a very simple syncopated pattern, and it goes like this. So, it's built on a paradiddle, and actually what it is, technically it would be a regular paradiddle on the right side, to an inverted paradiddle on the left side. So the second part would be left, right, right, left with the backbeat. Okay, simple enough. We're going to use that. We're going to combine it with a pattern from over here. And I'll just start with this simple pattern. That's in 5/16. And that's built on what I call a partial paradiddle. Right, left, right, right, left. And those are your 5 notes. So it would be sticked and played like. So if I combine the two, now I mathematically have combined a 13/16 pattern. Well, a lot of people say, 13/16, where am I going to use that? Well, in my world, I've been very fortunate. I've worked with a couple of really crazy composers who do write a lot of odd time stuff. And after playing and working through odd time stuff, these are some ideas I thought that would be perhaps quite helpful for people to at least get stress points in their head and understand what's going on. And as I said earlier, stress points are very important in any odd time signature. You need to know what's going on stress point wise. So here's the pattern now, and I have it over here. Let's flip a couple of pages. And here is some combination of an 8/16 and a 5/16 to make a 13/16. And it goes, well, we'll just take one that I have here, and it goes. I used a few different variations sticking-wise. Yeah. So variation sticking-wise, I could play my 8/16 inverted paradiddles. And, you know, other combinations. I have several. I could do my 5/16 with more of a little bit of a linear style pattern, where I break the cymbal up a little bit more of the hi-hat, and it comes to. So, but we're going to stay with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So anyway, let's try just the 8/16 pattern. I think that you'll get that one. So that's right, left, right, right, left, right, right, left. And in this stage, as you're playing it, whatever bass drum pattern feels comfortable. Let's not get too worried about where we're sitting with the bass drum. So wherever you want to put the bass drum, no problem. So play that pattern. We'll just play a 2/4 pattern over. Okay, so there's your 8. That's the rough version of the 8. Let's try the 5. So just play that repetitive 5. So it's right, left, right, right, left, right, left, right, right, left. Now let's take the 8, combine it with the 5, and see what you got. You missed your day. 1, 2, 1. You get the idea.
Yeah.
So, and I'll just play, you know, you can play a few different combinations. I'll try an 8 and a 3, which sounds pretty good for 11. And you got.
Yeah.
You know? So, and it goes on and on. And if you just construct a little thought and a little bit of a path to helping promote a better, you know, understanding and a little more confidence in that area, you'll be much better aligned when you get into a situation where you need to use it. Because, you know, when I was a kid and I was practicing this stuff, I thought, when am I ever going to use this? Because in general, you know, I do a lot of rock and roll gigs, cover gigs, some sessions that are more pop-based. But then I bumped into these two composers about 10 years ago, and they write some wacky stuff, man. You know, it's source music sometimes for, you know, TV shows or a movie or something like that. And it's really challenged me. And so through that, I thought, okay, I want to really be prepared. When somebody writes something in 13 and then it goes to 15 and then there's 4 bars of 7, you're like,
Yeah.
whoa, man. So,
You need this.
yeah, it's a little bit of a guide.
Yeah,
All right, man.
cool. Thank you very much.
Thanks, James.